Beloved child, step out of the shadows and draw near to the warmth of my presence. I have sacred whispers for your spirit, secrets of deep restoration that I do not unveil to just anyone. These are words intended to pierce through the calloused layers of your heart and touch the very essence of who you are. I have kept a silent, loving vigil over you, watching every tear fall and every sigh escape your lips with a tenderness you cannot yet fathom. I am here now to lead you by the hand into a sanctuary of rest, a stillness so profound and a peace so absolute that you have never experienced anything like it in all your years. I was there in the precise moment when the lights inside you began to flicker and dim. I saw when your internal gates started to slam shut, one by one. I watched as the fiery desire to fight for your life began to fade into a dull, grey embers, leaving you wondering if there was a single ounce of strength left in your marrow to give. In that moment of total depletion, I spoke a sovereign word over your destiny, a decree that is even now beginning to shift the tectonic plates of your reality. I am breathing the very breath of heaven back into the places that have grown cold and numb. I am pressing my hand against your heart, infusing it with a peace that does not just ignore your circumstances, but completely defies and transcends them. This is not merely a temporary bandage or a fleeting comfort. This is a resurrection of the soul. You have been trudging through a desert of days that felt as though they would never find a sunset. Your life had blurred into a monotonous, agonizing cycle of mere survival, where time lost its meaning and color. Every morning, you opened your eyes not with the spark of anticipation, but with a heavy, suffocating dread. You faced each new 24-hour cycle, unsure if you possessed the fortitude to even stand upright. You moved through the motions of your existence because you were forced to, not because you found joy in them. You wore a mask of functionality, smiling when social cues demanded it, speaking when silence became awkward, performing your duties like a well-oiled machine. But beneath that polished exterior, you were experiencing a silent, internal collapse. You were losing fragments of your identity, pieces of your soul, falling away into a dark abyss. And you had no idea how to retrieve them. You eventually stopped dreaming because the act of dreaming had become a source of exquisite pain. Every time you allowed yourself to peek over the horizon toward a better life, the harsh reality of the world found a new way to crush that fragile hope under its heel. Every time you dared to believe that the tide might finally turn, your circumstances rose up like a wall to remind you that nothing ever changes. So, you retreated. You deactivated the part of your mind that imagined a different future. You padlocked the chambers of your heart that dared to hunger for more. You buried the version of yourself that believed joy was a possibility, and you lied to yourself, calling this retreat wisdom. You called it self-protection. You convinced yourself that this cynical coldness was the mature response to a lifetime of disappointment. But I tell you today, it was not wisdom. It was a slow, agonizing death. You abandoned hope because hope felt like a cruel setup for further heartbreak. You had believed before, hadn't you? You had poured out your soul in prayer. You had leaned into trust with everything you had. And you asked yourself, what did it yield? You found yourself stuck in this hollow place of weariness and confusion, questioning if any of it ever truly mattered. You decided it was safer to expect nothing from the universe than to risk the agony of being let down again. You lowered your expectations until they were dragging in the dust, thinking that if you were already on the ground, you could never fall. But in doing so, you also forfeited the ability to be lifted. You surrendered your wings. You could no longer soar into the vast fullness of what I desired to pour into your life because you were too preoccupied with building a fortress to keep the pain out. A fortress that accidentally kept my blessings out too. You stopped fighting because you were simply exhausted from losing. It was battle after battle, a relentless onslaught of struggle and crisis. You were brave for so long. You kept getting back up, dusting yourself off, and pushing into the wind. But every time you thought you were gaining ground, a fresh blow knocked you backward. Every time you thought you were finally ascending the mountain, the path crumbled beneath your feet. Eventually, the sheer cumulative weight of 1,000 small defeats wore you down until your spirit was spent. You surrendered, not to my grace, but to the crushing weight of your environment. You waved the white flag of a broken heart and declared that you were finished. But listen closely. What you perceived as the end of your story was actually a divine pause. I was not a distant, indifferent spectator watching you fall apart. I was the one holding the fragments of your life together, while I prepared the soil for what is coming next. You thought you were disintegrating into nothingness. I saw a necessary renovation. You thought your world was falling into ruin. I saw a masterful reconstruction. You thought you were being defeated. I saw a strategic repositioning of your soul. From your perspective, it looked like a catastrophic failure, but from mine, it was a divine setup for a glory you cannot yet conceive. The future I am bringing you into requires a version of you that only my hands can fashion. It is not the version of you that tries to muscle through every obstacle in your own limited strength. It is not the version of you that thinks it has to have every answer mapped out. It is not the version of you that wears the exhausting armor of fake strength while shivering in fear. No, I am calling forth the version of you that knows how to lean your entire weight against me. The version that draws every gulp of air from my lungs and depends on my heart for every beat. I am calling forth the version of you that has walked through the fire and knows with absolute certainty that without me, you can do nothing. But with me, the impossible becomes your daily bread. Listen to these words right now. Do not just hear them with your physical ears or scan them with your eyes. Listen with the deepest sanctuary of your being, with your spirit, with the core of your existence that still recognizes the frequency of my voice. Even while your mind is spinning with confusion and your emotions feel like a stormy sea, listen from that quiet place within. These are not merely pleasant sentiments designed to give you a temporary emotional high. These are living, breathing words of power that carry the creative authority to transform everything they touch. Allow my voice to drift into those hidden places where you have been bleeding internally for years. Let it touch the wounds that you have never shown to another living soul. The secret pain you have camouflaged so expertly that even those who sleep beside you do not realize the depth of your agony. The private grief you carry in the shadows because you are certain no one could ever truly understand. The heavy shame you have never whispered aloud because you are terrified of the judgment that might follow. The cold fear that grips your throat in the middle of the night when you are alone with the silence. Let my voice reach into the very marrow of those dark places. You have labored so hard to be the strong one. You have been the pillar for everyone else, while your own foundation was cracking. You dragged yourself to work when your soul wanted to stay under the covers in the dark. You managed heavy responsibilities for others when you could barely find the energy to brush your own hair. You were the shoulder for others to cry on, even when you were drowning in your own unshed tears. And the world saw the performance, but they never saw the cost. No one knew the sheer willpower it took for you to keep your head above water. No one realized you were running on the fumes of a spent spirit, that you were one more bad phone call away from a total breakdown, holding onto the edge of the cliff by a fraying thread. But I need you to understand something. True strength is not the art of pretending you are okay when you are dying inside. Strength is not putting on a brave face to maintain a reputation. Strength is not convincing the world you have it all figured out while you are shattering in private. That isn't strength. That is a performance. That is survival mode. That is a slow, dignified self-destruction disguised as courage. Real strength is the humility to let me carry the burdens you were never designed to bear alone. Real strength is the honesty to admit that you have reached the end of your own capacity. Real strength is found in the vulnerability of saying, I need help. I need a savior. I need you. True power is found in surrender, not in the frantic striving of the ego. It is built through a beautiful dependence on my infinite resources, not through a lonely independence from the world. I am not asking you to try harder today. I am not handing you a longer to-do list or demanding more discipline, more willpower, or more grit. I am asking you to do the opposite. Stop trying so hard. Stop the frantic rowing and let me breathe life back into your tired lungs. Let me take the weight of the world off your shoulders. Let me step onto the battlefield and fight the giants you have been facing in your own strength. Let me be the God of your life. Not just a theological concept, but a practical, tangible, daily reality that you can lean on. Think for a moment of the woman in the ancient scrolls who suffered from a relentless hemorrhage for 12 long years. 12 years. Imagine the 1,000 mornings she woke up hoping for a change, only to find the same physical decay. 12 years of her life force slowly draining away, with no resolution and no end in sight. While the rest of the world moved forward, got married, celebrated harvests, and experienced miracles, she was stuck in a stagnant loop of pain and humiliation. She spent every penny she had on physicians who promised much but delivered nothing. She exhausted every resource, every savings account, and every social connection. And the record tells us she didn't just stay the same, she actually grew worse under their care. She paid for help and ended up more broken than when she started. She trusted the experts, and they left her with nothing but less hope and more agony. But the physical bleeding was only the surface of her trauma. The society and the religious system of her day branded her as unclean. She was a pariah. She could not be touched. She was forced into a cold, crushing isolation, cut off from the warmth of community and the solace of worship. She was excluded from the very places where a broken heart should find comfort. She couldn't enter the temple. She couldn't join the festivals. She couldn't even embrace her own children without making them ceremonially defiled. She lived in a thick shroud of shame. Shame that she couldn't get well. Shame that her body was a traitor. Shame that she had to live on the desolate margins of a society that had forgotten her name. And then something flickered in the darkness of her soul. She heard about me. She heard rumors of a different kind of rabbi, one who didn't recoil from the broken, but ran toward them. A healer who saw the person behind the pathology. A man who touched the leper and shared a table with the outcast. She heard stories of eyes seeing light for the first time and lame legs dancing. And those stories fanned a tiny, dormant spark into a flame of hope. She made a radical decision. Her desperation was finally greater than her fear of being caught. She decided that the slim possibility of wholeness was worth the absolute risk of public humiliation. She chose to break every religious law and social taboo because she believed that even the briefest contact with my presence would be enough to change her eternity. She didn't think she needed a long audience with me or a formal ceremony. She didn't need to be recognized or validated in front of the crowd. She just whispered to herself, "If I can just touch the hem of his garment, I will be made whole." She fought her way through a dense, suffocating crowd while she was physically fainting from anemia. Every person she bumped into was a legal risk. She could have been arrested or even stoned for her presence there. But she didn't care anymore. The risk of death was nothing compared to the prospect of living another day in that bleeding. She reached out with a trembling hand, her fingers stretching through the legs and torsos of the crowd, fueled by a mixture of terror and absolute faith. And the very microsecond her fingertips brushed the edge of my robe, power surged out of me like lightning and into her. It wasn't because she said the perfect prayer. It wasn't because she had a giant, mountain-moving faith by some religious standard. It was because she came with the very last bit of herself she had left. And that little bit was enough. Instantly, she felt the fountain of her blood dry up. 12 years of agony vanished in a heartbeat. Strength flooded her limbs. The heavy cloak of shame evaporated. The isolation that had been her prison for over a decade was shattered by a single encounter. One touch changed everything. But I didn't let her just disappear. I felt her touch in the middle of that chaotic crowd. I felt the pull of her desperation through the noise of everyone else's superficial demands. I stopped everything to look into her tear-stained eyes and call her daughter. I didn't call her woman or outcast. I called her daughter. I restored her identity along with her body. I gave her back the 12 years the locusts had eaten. And child, I am about to do the exact same thing for you. You have been bleeding internally in ways the world cannot see. You have been losing pieces of your joy and your vision for the future. You have been growing weaker while maintaining a facade of strength. You have been isolated in your private hell, even when you are in a crowded room. You have been carrying a heavy shame that was never yours to bear. You have been living on the outskirts of the life I promised you, watching others get their breakthroughs while yours seemed to be lost in the mail. You have tried everything. You read the books, you went to the therapy sessions, you listened to the podcasts, and you applied the 10-step programs. You prayed until your voice was hoarse and it felt like your words were hitting a brass ceiling. You fasted, you served, and you gave until you were empty. You did everything right, yet here you are, wondering why the math doesn't add up and why it works for everyone else, but not for you. Now, you are at the absolute end of yourself. Your strategies are exhausted. Your emotional bank account is overdrawn. You have no more clever ideas. But listen to me. The end of yourself is exactly where my beginning starts. The moment you truly stop trying to fix the unfixable in your own power is the moment I can finally step into the vacuum and do what only a creator can do. Your emptiness is not a failure. It is a massive opportunity. It is the blank canvas for my glory. I am speaking life over you right this second. Not in some vague, distant future when you finally get your act together, not after you have proven your worthiness through more labor. Right now, in this very moment, as these words settle into your consciousness. As you let them bypass your cynicism and touch the raw, tender places you have kept hidden. I am breathing my very spirit into the parts of you that have lost the will to live. I am caressing your weary heart with a peace that is independent of your bank account, your health, or your relationships. I am waking up the parts of you that went dormant to survive the pain. You are not weak because you grew tired. You are human. You were never designed to carry the crushing weight of the world. Your mind was not built to solve every riddle of the future. Your heart was not meant to process trauma in a vacuum. You were created to function in a seamless, rhythmic connection with me, drawing strength, peace, and direction from my infinite well. When you try to operate outside of that flow, you break. Not because you are defective, but because you are functioning against your design. The fact that you are still here, still breathing, and still open enough to hear these words after everything life has thrown at you proves that you are far stronger than you have ever given yourself credit for. Strength is not the absence of exhaustion. Strength is the ability to keep breathing when the air feels like lead. Strength is getting up for the 1,001st time after being knocked down 1,000 times. Strength is the courage to reach out from the bottom of the pit and ask for my hand. I see a fighter in you, even though you feel like a victim. I see a warrior, even though you feel like a coward. I see an overcomer, even though you feel paralyzed. I see a glorious victory in your future, even though you see nothing but walls in your present. I need you to start looking at yourself through my eyes. There are many, many days ahead of you. I know that thought might feel exhausting right now. When you are running on empty, the idea of a long future feels like a threat rather than a promise. You might wonder how you can possibly endure more years of the same struggle. But I am not promising you more of the same. I am not offering you a continuation of this gray survival. I am talking about days where you wake up and the first thing you feel is a surge of genuine hope. Days where my peace guards your heart so effectively that the chaos of the world feels like a distant movie. Days where you see my hand moving in your life in ways so obvious and so beautiful that you will laugh out loud in pure wonder. I am talking about days where joy returns as your permanent resident, not a visiting stranger. Days where you dream again, because the fear of disappointment has been swallowed up by my faithfulness. Days where you love with a whole heart, because the old wounds have been turned into beautiful scars. Days where you will be so profoundly grateful that you didn't give up when it was dark. Your best days are not a memory in the rearview mirror. They are a reality waiting for you just around the bend. Trust me, lean into me, and let us begin again.